Alexander Volkanovski is one of the top pound for pound guys in the world. So even, taking this fight on 10 days notice shows you what kind of fighter that Islam Makhachev is. So this is a huge feather in his cap, right? And a lot of people are actually starting to compare Islam Makhachev's legacy to Khabib Nurmagomedov's legacy. And so I have a lot of thoughts about this. All right, everyone, welcome to the channel. Once again, this is Sammy Bean with Rocked MMA. And so Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski, as you know, it was a late replacement fight for Alexander the Great. Came in on 10 days notice, up a weight class to rematch Islam Makhachev. After what was a great fight in their first fight, this one didn't turn out the same. So if you somehow didn't see the fight and you're here, absolutely devastating knockout by Islam Makhachev via left head kick in the first round. And my first thoughts, I have to say, I'm absolutely devastated for Volk. I mean, he came up, he kind of saved the card in a lot of ways. I mean, I think there were other guys who would have stepped in, but this was a fight that a lot of people wanted to see. And this is actually, I think, many people said that this was a better fight than the original fight versus Charles Oliveira. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But great fight on paper. First fight was an absolute war. But sometimes, this stuff happens. And like I said, absolutely devastated for Volk. He's got huge balls for stepping up to take this fight. And, we had some interesting words by Volkanovski as well. He's clearly absolutely devastated by this loss. And, he says that he wants to turn around quickly, go back down to featherweight, defend his featherweight title. But we can take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. The dude just had, the first KO loss, I think, in 10 or 15 years of his career. Obviously he had the close decision loss to Makhachev in the past, but absolutely brutal and absolutely feel for the guy. But before we get into what's next for Alexander Volkanovski, first I want to talk about Islam Makhachev. So this guy had an absolutely wonderful night, and props to him as well, right? Because this was not an easy fight for him on short notice. I mean, obviously he's the one with the training camp. He's fought him before, so he had something a little bit you could go to. But Alexander Volkanovski is one of the top pound for pound guys in the world. So even, taking this fight on 10 days notice shows you what kind of fighter that Islam Makhachev is. So this is a huge feather in his cap, right? And a lot of people are actually starting to compare Islam Makhachev's legacy to Khabib Nurmagomedov's legacy. And so I have a lot of thoughts about this. Obviously, Islam Makhachev is a great fighter. He had that one KO loss early in his UFC career, which, taints it a little bit. But, as far as fighting for the title defenses, you could argue that he certainly is getting there, comparing himself to Khabib Nurmagomedov. But what I will say is that I think people don't give Khabib enough credit, because in spite of everything, Khabib was actually a very unique personality for the sport, right? So you might even say he didn't even have the most exciting fighting style, right? But yet, it was compelling to watch every time he got in the octagon. A bit like Khamzat Chimaev, right? You think that, he is just... You want to see if he's going to be able to dominate all these different types of opponents. And to Khabib's credit, he did, right? And, not a lot of them were even close. I mean, I don't think you could say any of his fights were really even close. And he retired on top. So that's going to be a very difficult legacy to compete with. But if you're honestly just looking at wins and losses, quality of wins, and number of title defenses, there certainly is starting to be an argument to be made for Islam Makhachev having the better overall legacy. So, what's next for Islam Makhachev? Dana suggested that Charles Oliveira is next. And so, while this was a fight that I was excited to see, I love to see every time Charlie Olives gets up in the octagon. It's one of the most exciting fighters on the roster. I'm not sure that's the fight that I want to see. Honestly, I think a much better opponent, right, would be somebody new. We've seen the rematches, right? We've seen a lot of rematches lately, cross divisions, and I'd really love to see, for Islam's sake, while he's in his prime, for him to fight somebody new, get some different names on his record. So I would be leaning towards, and I know probably Mateusz Gamrot isn't going to appreciate this, but I would be leaning towards Justin Gaethje. Many people have said that they believe this is a similar style matchup to Gaethje versus Khabib, and we can expect the same thing. Islam would run through Gaethje, he would run through Poirier, but I don't think that's the case, because Islam uses his wrestling in a much different way than Khabib did. And I think that Justin Gaethje is athletic enough, he's savvy enough that he can make this an interesting fight. But another difference in the fight with Khabib, I think that Islam is a much better striker than Khabib ever was. So I think that either guy could win on the feet, and it's a fight that I absolutely want to see. So no disrespect to Charlie Olives, and I hope his cut heals up well and quickly. But the fight I would love to see next is Makhachev versus Gaethje. And just one more thing to say about that fight, and really any fight in the lightweight division, I would still favor Islam Makhachev against anybody. But I think that Justin Gaethje just brings an interesting and new challenge to the table. So we've talked about Islam. Now we got to talk about what's next for Alexander the Great Volkanovski. Volk said that he's interested in fighting again on the card in January in Toronto. I don't really think that that's going to happen. Look, he is a fantastic fighter. He actually made some comments talking about, when I'm not getting ready for a fight, I don't really feel like myself. And I think that it's been a little bit overblown, honestly. I mean, the guy just took a devastating knockout loss. Obviously, he wants to kind of get that bad taste out of his mouth. He was and he still is a pound for pound great, experiencing taking losses for the first time in a very long time, right? And of course he wants to get back in there and sort of get this in the rearview mirror. But at the same time, this guy has had a lot of stuff going on in his life. He just had a child, I believe. And again, I think anyone in their right mind, if you don't have something that you're working on, working towards, you don't have goals, you do start to feel a little bit stir crazy. So I think that these comments have been a little bit overblown. Obviously, I think everybody knows that Ilia Topuria is next, but I don't think it's going to happen in January. I predict that this fight is going to take place probably in March of next year. Another thing that I want to say about Alex Volkanovski is that the guy is an absolute legend, and he will be back, right? He didn't really have a chance to show off, what he's been working on, what he's been training on in this fight. And I think that he's still got a ton to offer. I think he's still by far in the lead in the featherweight division. But the interesting conversation happens when you think about what's next after Ilia Topuria, right? Because at this point, I mean, he's fought Max Holloway 1,000 times. He's pretty much cleared out the rest of the division. And he's lost to the current 155-pound champion, Islam Makhachev, 2 times. So where do you go from here? That will be a conversation for down the road. But I would love to see if we could just get Volkanovski in some fun fights. I mean, he is getting a little bit up there in age for his division. So I think he's 35 years old. And I'd love to see him, get in there, mix it up with guys like Oliveira, Gaethje, Poirier, and just do some whatever the biggest fights are that he can get, because He really doesn't have anything else to prove. Maybe some dark horse contenders will emerge at featherweight. Maybe, some of these guys like Aljo, maybe even Sean O'Malley, maybe a year in the future will want to move up and challenge him at 145 pounds. But at this point, it's hard to see who's going to really challenge him at featherweight. Overall, it was a great card. I'll be posting some more videos about some of the other fights on the card, some of the little weird intricacies that happened overseas, which you don't necessarily like to see, but we'll be talking about them. And overall, it was a big step up, for Volkanovski. It was a big risk for him to take this fight on 10 days notice. And so huge props to him. He'll be back. I have no concerns about his mental state, any of that stuff, how he looked physically whatsoever. He'll be fine. And it sounds like he got a new contract in the midst of all this. So good for him. I think he'll be returning home, spending some time with his family, and getting a fight in early next year with Ilia Topuria. Overall, hopefully we can get some new contenders in to fight both of these guys who have been extremely dominant in their division. At lightweight, there's still a ton of guys you'd love to see Islam Makhachev fight. So hopefully we see it soon. So thank you from Rocked MMA, and we'll see you next time.